Hey everybody, my name is Rick. Yesterday I kind of randomly watched a video from John Green where he listed off 18 books that he thought were great that just happened to not be bestsellers. So today I thought I would do something similar. I'm going to take 16 unheralded books off the shelves that you see behind me that I think are great, that I think you probably haven't read, and we're going to blaze through them really quick, do some rapid fire recommendations for you. So let's go. Book number 1 is King Dork from Frank Portman. This is one of my favorite coming of age novels that I've ever read. And honestly, it's worth it for the kids' band names alone. With names like Ray Bradbury's Love Camel, the Nancy Wheelers, Sentient Beard, Green Sabbath, and Wagbog, which stands for What a Great Bunch of Guys. Next, we have The Brothers K by David James Duncan. If you're a sucker for family sagas, this is one of the best ones that I've ever read. If you love books that deal with sports, if you love books that deal with war and politics, if you love books that deal with spirituality and religion, The Brothers K is right up your alley. Next, we have Grendel by John Gardner. This is one of the best novellas I've read in my entire life. If you love books that take fairy tales and myths and old stories and kind of turn them on their head, this is a great choice for you. This takes one of the most terrifying monsters in English literature, Grendel from the epic poem Beowulf, and tells his side of the story, and it is ridiculous how good it is. Next, we have Paul Quarrington's The Ravine. I think this is one of the true uncovered gems in Canadian literature. Goodreads has like 160 ratings on this book. Not even reviews, ratings on this book. Like, no one has read this book, and it is one of the most fascinating, heartbreaking, and beautiful looks at an adult going back to when they were a kid and kind of piecing together the stuff that kind of ruined their life and then trying to put it back together. This is a book about how stories are made, how stories can also save us from the worst things that have ever happened to us, and how we need to forgive ourselves sometimes in order to move on. Next, we have Essex County from Jeff Lemire. Simply put, this is the best graphic novel I've ever read in my life. It's the story of a fictional town set across a couple of generations, and it's a story about grief and memory and forgiveness and reconciliation. Just read it, it's unbelievable. Next up, we have Land of the Blind by Jess Walter. Jess Walter kind of hit the public conscious when he put out Beautiful Ruins a couple of years ago, but I read Land of the Blind first, and I think I might prefer it. Basically, the story of the novel is a man sits down with a police detective to confess to a crime that is yet to be reported, and it just gets weirder from there. Next up, we have Sylvia Townsend Warner's Lolly Willows. If you're someone who considers themselves a reader of classics, if you're someone who considers themselves a reader of feminist literature and you have not read Lolly Willows, what the hell are you doing? It is phenomenal, and I don't know how it's not talked about in like the established grand canon. I read it a year or two ago and it blew my mind. Also, if you love witches, one of the coolest books about witches ever. Next, we have Lemnop by Mark Dunn. This is one of the most fun, inventive books I've ever read in my life. It tells the story of a fictional island that worships Lmnop, who is the guy who supposedly invented the phrase, "the quick brown fox jumps over the lazy dog." So these people worship this perfect sentence that contains every letter in the alphabet. There's a statue at the center of town that has it inscribed, and all of a sudden, some of the letters start to fall off. And when this happens, they think it's a sign from their god, Lmnop, that you're not supposed to use those letters anymore. So the book is told in epistolary format, and as every letter falls off this statue, Mark Dunn, writing the book, is not allowed to use that letter anymore. So by the end of the book, he's only able to use 6, 7, 8 letters. Meanwhile, there's a couple of really fun plots in and around this concept. It's just, there's no book that's ever been written like it. It's really quick, it's short, super easy to read. I would absolutely recommend it to anybody. So I just need to stop for 1 second and say that there's like weird like light and shadow on my face because I have a window right over there. I've never filmed from this part in my house. This is why. Sorry if it's confusing and distracting and weird. I'm sorry. I also just realized that the camera is positioned at an angle where my shelves are actually tilted. This is why I don't film here. Number 9 is The Dilettantes by Michael Hinkston. If you love campus novels, if you love student newspapers, if you love college hijinks, or if you hate all that stuff, The Dilettantes works equally well for you. This book is charming, incisive, witty as hell. It's great. Number 10 is Alas, Babylon by Pat Frank. This is a book that came out, I think, in the 50s and it's about a town, or one of the few towns on Earth that survives a nuclear holocaust. So now is either a really good time to read this book for you, or now is really not a good time to read this book for you, with like a pandemic going on. But it's just fascinating to watch one town try to survive when kind of thousands of years of civilization are stripped away overnight. So people from all different kinds of backgrounds have to join together to try to make their way through this darkness or give into it. Number 11 is Next Year for Sure by Zoe Lee Peterson. This is probably the best book about unconventional relationships I think I've ever read. This is a really beautiful, really confusing, really complicated, really empathetic, and really honest book about a once great love that's been pushed to the edge. It's fantastic. I think I'm actually going to reread this book this year. I haven't read it in a couple of years, and I don't think anyone on BookTube has really talked about it, and I think somebody needs to talk about it. So yeah, if you read it, I'll read it soon, and we can chat about it. That's a story for another video. Next, we have When Everything Feels Like the Movies by Raziel Reed. This is one of the most brazen, brave, over-the-top, crazy, genre-busting novels that I've read in the last 10 years. This book came out in 2014, and a lot of people were not ready for it. I think this is one of the most banned books, or attempted to be banned books, that I've ever come across. It's probably the first book that really opened my eyes to the trans community. Brutal, it's heart-wrenching, but it's so honest and necessary. Number 13, I can't go through a video where I talk about more than 15 books without mentioning Tad Williams, my favorite writer. If you're someone who likes single volume fantasy, because there's not very many good ones out there, please read War of the Flowers by Tad Williams. It is a story of a man who gets whisked away to a fairy world, but usually that happens with stories of children. This is like a fully grown man who's kind of lost in his life, and he gets pulled into this war with a bunch of these literal fairies. It's fun, it's beautiful, I swear to God it's funny. If you're a reader of fantasy fiction and you want to read a book with a bit of a twist, I promise there's not been a book that you've read like this in the last couple of years. It's great. Next up we have Malagash by Joey Como. This is a tiny little gem of a book. It is about a young girl whose father is dying. They move back to his hometown to kind of make him comfortable before he passes. And his daughter decides she wants to try and make her father live on forever. So she starts recording down everything he says, as much information as she can get out of him before he dies. And she programs a version of his personality into a computer virus. It's a quirky little book. It's only like 180 pages or so, but it's gorgeous and it's tragic and it's sad. So if you feel like feeling like that, this is perfect. Number 15 is Apathy and Other Small Victories by Paul Nealon. I read this book probably 15 years ago, and it's the funniest thing that I've ever read in my entire life. It is one of the few books that, to me, was as funny as any kind of comedy movie that you watch, because there's a big difference between what's funny on film and what's funny in a book. Usually when you read a book and something's funny, you're just kind of like, that's funny. But this is like, I was bursting out laughing, holding my stomach. It's so weird. The humor is not going to be for everybody. It's really dry, but if it's your thing, this book is really going to be your thing. And finally, on the complete opposite end of the spectrum is Where Women Are Kings by Christie Watson. This is one of the most heart-wrenching, difficult, powerful books I've read in the last 5 years probably. It's about a woman named Nikki who adopts a little 7-year-old boy named Elijah. Nikki and her husband are white. Elijah is black. He has a history of really disruptive behavior. He's had a really difficult childhood. And needless to say, the challenges that they have to face together are just devastating. If you feel like you need to curl up and have a good cry, if this book doesn't make you do that, I don't know what will, and I don't know how you're a living, breathing person if you don't read this book and don't feel just crushed. But at the end of the day, you're so thankful for this experience. So there you go. That's the quickest I think I've ever talked about 16 books in my whole life. I filmed a video the other day where I talked about one book for 25 minutes, and I just did 16 books in like 9 minutes. My name is Rick. Thank you so much for watching. If you know any great unheralded books, please put them down in the comments. I would love to hear about them, and I'll talk to you guys in a couple days. Bye.